My son-in-law looked me dead in the eyes across my own kitchen table and said, "This house would be perfect for my parents. They're moving in at the end of the month." He didn't ask. He didn't suggest. He told me. I remember the coffee mug in my hand. I remember the way the morning light was coming through the window over the sink, hitting the countertop I'd refinished myself back in 2009. I remember thinking, very calmly, that I had misheard him, because no man who had been sitting at my table for 6 years, eating my food, borrowing my truck, watching football in my living room, could possibly have just said what I thought he said. But then he smiled, and I knew I hadn't misheard a thing. That house on Birchwood Lane had been mine for 31 years. I bought it when my daughter was 4 years old, when my wife was still alive, when I was 34 and working double shifts at the plant to make the down payment. I remember the first night we spent there. No furniture except a mattress on the floor and the folding table, and my wife made grilled cheese sandwiches on a borrowed electric skillet because we hadn't hooked up the stove yet. My daughter sat between us on the mattress and said the house smelled like new crayons. I don't know why it smelled like that, but I never forgot it. I raised my daughter in that house. I watched her learn to ride a bike in that driveway. I sat with her at that kitchen table through 3 years of trigonometry homework that neither of us fully understood. I painted her room purple when she was 13 because she begged me, and I painted it white again when she left for college because I couldn't stand walking past it. I put a new roof on that house in 2014, mostly by myself, with my neighbor helping on weekends. It took us 11 days. I was 60 years old and my knees haven't been the same since, but I didn't care. It was my house. My wife passed in 2016. Pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to gone. After that, the house became something different. It became the only place on earth where I still felt close to her. The garden she planted along the back fence, the small dent in the hallway wall where she'd bumped it moving a bookcase, the particular way the floorboards creaked near the bedroom door, which I'd stopped trying to fix because the sound had become part of something I didn't want to lose. My daughter Nora met Marcus, my son-in-law, at a work conference in Denver. She brought him home to meet me 8 months later. He was smooth. That's the word I always came back to. Smooth handshake, smooth answers, smooth way of filling a room with the impression that he was in charge of it. He sold commercial real estate in Phoenix. He wore watches that cost more than my first car. He called me Sir in a way that somehow managed to sound like an insult. I tried. I genuinely tried, because Nora loved him, and Nora was all I had left. I went to their wedding in Scottsdale. I gave a toast that made people cry. I babysat their daughter, made people cry. I babysat their daughter, my granddaughter, Bea, every time they asked, which was often. I drove 4 hours when Marcus threw out his back and Nora needed help with the baby. I lent them money twice without being asked twice to pay it back. I tried. But there was always something underneath Marcus that I couldn't quite name. A calculation. A way of looking at things and people in terms of what they were worth. Not worth to him emotionally. Worth to him emotionally. Worth to him practically. I'd catch it sometimes in the way he talked about his own parents, the way he talked about our neighborhood, the way he'd walk through my house when he visited and let his eyes move over things in a manner that made me feel like he was appraising them. I should have trusted that feeling sooner. The Sunday he said what he said, he and Nora had come up from Phoenix for the weekend. Bea was 18 months old, running around the backyard getting muddy while Nora watched from the porch. Marcus had come inside for coffee and I thought we were just going to sit there. Just two men having coffee on a Sunday morning. Normal. This house would be perfect for my parents. They're moving in at the end of the month. I set my mud down. Say that again. My parents are relocating from Florida. The climate down there, my dad's health, it's just not working anymore. They need to be somewhere cooler, somewhere with family nearby. And this house, he looked around my kitchen like he was already measuring for curtains. It's ideal. Single level, quiet street, close to us. This is my house, I said. I know that, sir. The word again. That's why I'm bringing it to you directly, man to man. We'd cover your moving costs, obviously. Help you find a nice apartment closer to Nora and me. There are some really comfortable 55-plus communities in the East Valley. Marcus. And honestly, this place is probably more house than you need at this point. It's a lot of upkeep for one person. Marcus. He stopped. "Are you telling me to leave my house?" He set his own mug down and leaned back in his chair with that smile. The patient smile of someone who has decided they are the smartest person in the room and is willing to wait for you to figure that out. "I'm saying this is an opportunity. For everyone. For your parents. For the whole family." I heard Nora laughing outside. Bea had found the hose somehow. I looked out the window at my daughter, my granddaughter, the backyard my wife had planted, and I made myself breathe. "I'd like you to leave now," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'd like you and Nora to pack up, get Bea in the car, and go home. I'm not going to discuss this today." He started to say something about being reasonable, about having a conversation like adults, about how I was going to have to face reality at some point. I stood up. I'm 66 years old and I've been a big man my whole life. I didn't say anything else. I just stood up, and something in my face or my posture communicated what I didn't put into words because he stopped talking. Nora was confused when they left. She hugged me at the door and whispered, "Dad, are you okay? What happened?" I told her we'd talk soon, that I loved her and that everything was fine. I kissed Bea on the forehead. I went back inside and stood in my kitchen for a long time. How many mornings had I made coffee in this room? How many times had I sat at this table with my wife, with Nora, with neighbors and friends and people who had needed somewhere to land? How many Thanksgivings had I cooked a full dinner here because there were people who had nowhere else to go? I was a shop teacher for 32 years at Millbrook High School. Shop class, officially called industrial technology, but everyone just called it shop. I taught woodworking, metalworking, basic electrical, basic mechanics. I taught teenagers how to measure twice and cut once. I taught them how to be patient with materials that didn't cooperate. I taught them that you could build something real and lasting with your hands if you were willing to take the time. It wasn't a glamorous job. Marcus had made that clear at a dinner 2 years earlier. Not with any one sentence, but with the cumulative effect of his expressions over the course of the evening. The slight pause before he answered when someone asked what I did for a living, as if he was deciding how to frame it. "Oh, he teaches as a high school," he'd said. "Shop class." The way he said it made me feel like a punchline to a joke no one had told out loud. I taught shop class for 32 years, and in 32 years you see a lot of kids. Some of them were fine middle-class kids with stable homes who took the class as an elective and moved on. But some of them weren't fine at all. Some of them came to my classroom because it was the only room in the school where anyone expected something real from them, where there was a task and a result and no one could fake it. You either built the thing or you didn't. I stayed late more times than I can count. I let kids work in the shop after hours when I could see they needed somewhere to be. I knew which ones weren't eating enough. I knew which ones were sleeping on couches. I drove 2 boys to community college orientation because no one else in their lives was going to do it. I wrote more letters of recommendation than any teacher in the school's history. I know because the principal told me so at my retirement party. I didn't do any of that for recognition. I did it because those kids needed someone who showed up, and I was there. After Marcus and Nora left that Sunday, I called my oldest friend, a retired electrician named Bud, who'd lived 3 streets over for 20 years. I told him what had happened. There was a long silence. "That boy actually said that to you in your own kitchen." "He did." Another silence. "Hank," Bud said. "That's my name, Hank. What do you need me to do?" I told him I didn't know yet, that I needed to think. I thought for 2 days. I didn't answer Marcus's text. I answered Nora's calls because she was my daughter and she was scared, and I told her I was fine and asked her to give me a little time. She was trying to understand. I believe she was genuinely trying. She didn't know the full scope of what her husband had said to me, or what he had planned. She found out later. On the 3rd day, I called an attorney. A real estate attorney, specifically. I wanted to know exactly where I stood and exactly what my options were. The attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia. Wait, I can't use that name. She was a sharp woman. Let's say her name was June. June walked me through everything clearly. The house was mine, free and clear. I paid off the mortgage in 2019. There was nothing Marcus could do legally to touch it. What he was banking on, June explained, was my willingness to go along, He'd been betting that I was old, or tired, or lonely, or guilty enough about being a burden that I'd say yes. He'd miscalculated. What I did next, I didn't do out of anger. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a vindictive man by nature. But I had spent 32 years teaching young people that when something matters, you protect it. You don't let someone walk into your shop and take your tools because they've decided they need them more than you do. You stand your ground, and you make sure everyone in the room understands exactly where that ground is. I started making calls. I have a contact list on my phone that I've never once cleaned out. Ex-students going back to 1989. I'm not on social media much, but I have an email list. I started it years ago as a newsletter for the woodworking club I ran after I retired. It had grown. One email a month, nothing fancy, just updates on what I was building. Sometimes a technique tip, sometimes a story. Over 400 people on that list by the time this happened. I sent one email. I said what was happening. I said that my son-in-law had told me in my own kitchen that I should vacate my home of 31 years to make room for his parents, that he had suggested I move into a 55-plus community in Phoenix. I said I was not leaving my house. I said I was asking not for charity, not for pity, but for anyone who had ever learned something in my classroom and found it useful. Anyone who had ever fixed something with their own hands because I'd shown them how. To come by on Saturday morning if they wanted to show Marcus. And anyone else watching that some things in this life are earned, not just taken. I didn't know what to expect. I genuinely didn't. Saturday morning I made coffee at 6 and sat on my front porch. By 8 Bud was there. By 8:30 two former students, now in their 30s, had pulled up in a truck with lumber in the back. By 9 I stopped counting vehicles. I want to tell you something about what it feels like to see that happen, because I don't think I have the words for it exactly. I had men and women standing in my driveway who I hadn't seen in 20 years. I had a woman who'd been in my first period class in 1994. She was a grandmother now, who drove 90 minutes from Flagstaff because she said my shop class was the first place a teacher had ever told her that her work was genuinely good. I had a man who'd been a troubled 15-year-old and was now a contractor with his own business, who brought 4 of his employees with him. I had a couple who'd both been students of mine in different years, who'd met at my retirement party and gotten married, who brought their kids. 43 vehicles. I counted them eventually because I needed to believe it was real. They didn't come to do anything dramatic. There was no confrontation. They came because when I taught them, I had shown up for them, and now they were showing up for Mim, and now they were showing up for me. Some of them helped me with a fence project I'd been putting off. Some of them brought food. Some of them just sat on the porch and talked. My granddaughter Bea, who Nora had brought over because she didn't know what was happening and just wanted to see her grandfather, spent the morning being passed from person to person, like a little queen, absolutely delighted with the attention. Nora stood on the porch and watched all of it with an expression I couldn't quite read. Somewhere between overwhelmed and ashamed, and something that looked like clarity arriving slowly. The way it does when you've been not quite seeing something for a long time. Marcus arrived at 11:15. He parked on the street because the driveway was full. He walked up through the yard with his hands in his pockets and that smooth look on his face that I think he must have practiced in the mirror, and he stopped when he saw how many people were there. He didn't say much. I didn't need him to. I walked over to him, calmly. I was aware of Nora watching from the porch and Bud standing nearby, and 43 vehicles in and around my property. "This is my house," I said quietly. "My wife and I bought it in 1993. I've maintained it, paid for it, and kept it for 31 years. It is not available. It will not be available. And the next time you sit at my kitchen table and tell me where I should be living, you won't be invited back to that table." He opened his mouth. "Your parents are welcome to visit," I said. "They're not welcome to move in." That's the end of the conversation. He left. He and Nora had a long, difficult conversation that week. She told me about it later, haltingly, like she was still processing it. She hadn't known what he'd been planning. She hadn't known he'd already looked into senior apartment complexes near their house, already priced out the cost of relocating his parents, already had a timeline in his head for how this was going to unfold. She'd thought it was just something he'd mentioned casually. She hadn't known he'd come to me that Sunday, intending to close a deal. What happened after that, I'll tell you plainly, things were hard for a while. Nora and Marcus had real problems that didn't go away quickly. I don't know all of what they worked through. That was their marriage, not mine. What I know is that Nora started calling me more often, not less. What I know is that Bea spent a week with me last summer, and we built a birdhouse together, and she held the wood steady while I showed her how to use a hand drill, and she was remarkably patient for a 3-year-old. What I know is that I'm still on Birchwood Lane. The fence is done now. My former student, the contractor, came back on his own time with better materials than I'd had, and we finished it in a weekend. It's the best fence I'd ever had. Solid posts, cedar planks, good hardware. Built to last. I think about the year I retired, standing in my empty classroom for the last time, running my hand along the workbenches I'd built myself in 1991. I thought about all the things that had been made in that room, all the kids who discovered that they were capable of something they hadn't believed they were capable of, all the small dignities that come from making something real. I didn't go into teaching for the money. I didn't go in expecting a parade. I went in because I believed, and still believe, that showing up for people day after day in whatever small way you can is the thing that holds a life together. Not the watches, not the real estate, not the smooth handshake in the sense that you're the smartest person in any room you walk into. The thing that holds a life together is showing up. Marcus's parents, as far as I know, found a rental in Tempe. I hope it suits them. I genuinely hope they're comfortable and close to their son and settle somewhere that feels like home. I know what it means to have a home that feels like home. I know what it costs. I know what it's worth. And I know, standing on my porch on a Tuesday morning with my coffee, looking at the new fence and my wife's garden and the driveway where 43 people once parked their vehicles, to tell me that my life had mattered to them. I know that no one is ever going to look at me across my own kitchen table again and tell me where I should be living. Not while I can still stand up. I still think about that Saturday morning sometimes, the way the first truck pulled up before I'd even finished my second cup of coffee. The way people I hadn't seen in 2 decades walked up my driveway like it was the most natural thing in the world. People asked me if I planned it that way, if I knew what would happen when I sent that email. The honest answer is no. I sent it because I didn't know what else to do, and because 32 years in a classroom had taught me that the only thing worth doing when something matters is telling the truth about it and seeing who shows up. What Marcus never understood, what I don't think he was built to understand, is that a life isn't an asset to be managed. You don't accumulate people the way you accumulate property. You earn them, slowly, through 10,000 small decisions that nobody's keeping score of. Every time I stayed late for a kid who had nowhere to go. Every letter I wrote. Every Saturday I gave up. None of that was a transaction. I wasn't storing credit for later. I was just doing what I thought was right, because that's what you do when you're a decent person and someone needs something you can give. But those things don't disappear. That's what I've come to understand. Every honest action leaves a mark somewhere, in someone. Marcus built his life on the assumption that the world runs on leverage, that you get what you take, that strength means having more than the other person. He looked at my house and saw square footage. He looked at me and saw someone past his usefulness. He calculated very carefully that I had nothing left to play. He forgot to calculate for 32 years of showing up. I'm not a man who believes the universe is keeping a ledger. I don't think some invisible hand rewarded me for being a good teacher. What I believe is simpler and harder than that. The kind of person you are, practiced daily over decades, becomes the kind of life you live. Marcus's calculation failed not because fate intervened, but because he had never invested in anything that couldn't be quantified. When it mattered, he had no one to call. When it mattered, I had 400 people on an email list who remembered what it felt like when someone believed in them. That's not luck. That's not karma. That's just the long arithmetic of character. Nora is still working through what she learned about her husband that month. I don't push her. She's a smart woman, and she's figuring it out on her own timeline, which is the only timeline that ever works. What I notice is that she calls more. What I notice is that Bea held a hand drill last summer and didn't flinch. Just steadied the wood and waited like she'd been doing it her whole short life. I think about what I want her to grow up knowing. Not the house. She can have the house eventually. That's not the point. I want her to know that real strength isn't the ability to take things from people. It's the ability to stand your ground when someone tries to take something from you, calmly, without cruelty, with the full weight of everything you've built behind you. I want her to know that your mind is a tool you have to keep sharp, that you never stop learning how things work, that the person who understands the problem clearly is always in a better position than the person who's only confident. And I want her to know that none of it matters. Not the integrity, not the clear thinking. If you quit when it gets hard. If you move into the apartment because it's easier. If you let someone else's certainty override your own. I'm still on Birchwood Lane. The fence is the best one I've ever had. That's enough.